I'm here to reveal the true history of George Washington and Washington College. Our story begins in the very end of the Revolutionary War. The end of 1781, America has won its independence from the British. The United States, a brand new rising empire on the west side of the Atlantic Ocean, ready to take its place among the great powers of the world. And at this moment of American history, with the British and American armies still facing off against one another in an uneasy truce, one man had a vision. He knew just what the new United States needed. This man, William Smith, founder of Washington College, knew that what we needed was a college. Now, why at this moment in American history would a college be something that seemed so essential? Well, here Smith says it in his own words: "We must attend to the rising generation. The souls of our youth must be nursed up to the love of liberty and knowledge." Now, to Smith and the rest of his generation, liberty and knowledge were things that went hand in hand with one another and seemed like a particularly pressing concern at this moment in history. Why? Well, because at this moment in time, many colonial Americans more or less resembled this. These gentlemen carousing in a tavern. You can see that the one on the right is somewhat worse for his liquor. And they were especially worried about this because here they were, they had a new democracy. The very word democracy means rule by the people, rule by the ordinary citizens of this new country, not rule by an aristocracy, not rule by a monarchy, but rule by these kinds of people here. God help us. So the great question was, how do you turn this into this? Ladies and gentlemen, no easy matter. But undaunted, William Smith founded his college right here on the eastern shore of Maryland, a most likely spot, of course, in the bustling metropolis of mighty Chestertown. In fact, Chestertown was thought of as being a great center of this rising new nation. It was actually, statistically speaking, the center of the U.S. population at the very beginning of our nation's history. And it was thought that this would be a place where a mighty American metropolis might soon rise up on the eastern shore. William Smith did succeed in getting a charter for this new college, the College at Chester, as it was originally called, chartered by the Maryland legislature in the spring of 1782. Okay, so they had the new nation, they had the place, they had the college. We just needed one more thing. A mascot. Wait. No, I'm sorry. Wrong mascot. That came along a little bit later, I think, much as I like Gus the Goose. No, here was our mascot, ready-made for this new nation, ready-made for this new college. You see him there. He's surrounded by a bevy of adoring beauties, as George Washington was, I believe, everywhere he went in the 18th century. The women just flocked to him. There was some kind of George Washington pheromone or something like that. But there he was. He was the obvious choice, and so indeed William Smith made him Washington College's founding patron saint and wrote George Washington a letter. And William Smith was a very persistent man. He was also a man who was somewhat enamored of celebrity. And so he wrote to George Washington and told him, as you can see here, that this new college had been founded and that its founders wanted to name the college after George Washington, and indeed that they would like George Washington to serve as a member of the Board of Trustees, the Board of Visitors and Governors of this brand new institution of higher learning. He wrote an incredibly flowery letter to Washington, and he talked about how what he wanted was to create a monument, a private monument to you in the heart of every good citizen. He said that in the future, for hundreds of years to come, Americans will be building monuments to you, General Washington, monuments of marble, monuments of bronze. But what we want to do is create a private monument inside every heart, inside the hearts of our students, not just now, but for many generations to come into the future. And what we want to do is inspire them, as he says, to admire and to imitate these public virtues and patriot labors. So in a way, Washington was going to be more than just a mascot for this college. He was going to be a kind of a founding spirit. He was going to be the man who would turn this into this. Now, Washington wrote back to William Smith. He wrote, as Washington always did, a very genteel and polite letter. And this is where the secrets start to be unveiled. Now, we've all heard these stories about Washington as the founding patron of Washington College. He generously gave a gift of 50 golden guineas to found this institution of higher learning. He served on the board of trustees. And so we all have these images of Washington opening his purse and withdrawing 50 gold guineas that he presented to this college. We all have this image of Washington sitting there attentively at board of trustees meetings, board meetings for Washington College, planning the future of his pet institution. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you, none of that happened. What George Washington wrote back to William Smith was pretty much this: thanks, but no thanks. He said, well, it's very nice of you to want to name this college after me. I'm not really sure I'm worthy to have a college named after me. There are probably better people that you could name a college after. And thanks also for inviting me to join the board, but I have to admit that, I don't really have the time to join this board, so you'd be much better off finding somebody else. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Well, Reverend Smith, as I said, was a persistent man, not one to take no for an answer. And so he promptly turned around, named the college after George Washington nonetheless, and moreover, enrolled George Washington as a member of the Board of Visitors and Governors without his consent, wrote a letter back saying, thank you very much, we know you can't really serve, but we're going to put your name on the board anyway. We don't really care if you never come to the meetings. So Washington was sort of shanghaied into service. At this point, he did make a gift of 50 guineas to Washington College. And you see here, preserved in the Library of Congress, in the George Washington papers, Washington's original draft of 50 guineas to Washington College. You can see it eagerly signed by William Smith down there, his first major gift in his presidential role as a fundraiser. He promptly sent this money to Philadelphia, where it was used to purchase some scientific equipment for Washington College, an interesting choice as a first purchase with this major gift. I see Professor Cregan smiling in the audience. And there's one part of this story, however, that is not usually told. What's not usually told is this: George Washington took this 50 guinea gift and expensed it to the Continental Congress. Turned around and expensed it. Moreover, the expense actually, when the squirrely little Continental Congress accountant at the end of the Revolutionary War went through Washington's long series of expenses, deciding what to reimburse, he probably, 5 guineas for a new sword, 40 guineas for a new horse, 50 guineas for a college in Maryland. And he actually flagged the expense and actually queried Washington on this expense. And then I think they actually decided anyway that since Washington had just won independence for the new nation, they would let this expense go. So the Continental Congress did cover it. So Washington, basically, that was more or less the end of his relationship with the college for a while. He failed, of course, to appear at any Board of Trustees meetings where he was expected to show up. However, the persistent faculty and students and founder of Washington College insisted on continued to treat him as the college's mascot. Here's just one example. This is the very first commencement in 1783 that they had right out here on the campus green, possibly over in Emmanuel Church. And there's this speech, this valedictory speech, commencement oration given by one of the students. Here he rises up, as the instructions say, in poetic rapture. I wish they would do that at commencements today. You know, just get up there, oh, something like that. So he rises up in poetic rapture, and he says, it comes, the promised era comes. Now peace and science shall disperse the glooms of war and error. So he's saying, this is the end of our Revolutionary War. In fact, the Treaty of Paris had been just signed a little bit earlier in that year of 1783, and now is going to be the time of peace and science. So again, this idea that peace is going to bring with it a new era in learning, a new era in American education. And in fact, he goes on to explain this, and he talks about, in, again, extravagant classical terms, where youthful nature with stupendous scenes lifts all the powers and all the frames serene. Oh, till then here fix earth, water, air, invite, till a new Rome and Athens spring to light. So Chestertown was going to be Rome and Athens, wrapped into one. Okay. And then he goes on to explain this further. He's talking about worthies, crowd before mine eyes, imagining this future of America. There's going to be a Washington rising up in the place of Cincinnatus, the Roman hero. They already have their Washington. It can only be a matter of time before America has Bacons, Newtons, Locke's, Euclid's, Tully's, Plato's. All of these great scientists, all of these great philosophers and thinkers of the old world are going to rise up in America, and it's all going to happen here in Chestertown. So, in fact, I have to say that this went beyond simply talking the talk. They also walked the walk at Washington College from the very early days. And you can see this actually in the curriculum that they studied. Now, Washington College, while its connection with George Washington may in some ways have been obscured by the mists of time, has very justly been called the Revolutionary College. Washington College was the Revolutionary College not just in the sense that it was founded indeed during the Revolutionary War, the first college founded in our new nation, but also revolutionary in the lowercase r sense, the sense that its curriculum was something radically new for both the New World and the Old World at that moment in time. So when you think of the older universities that existed, places like Oxford and Cambridge back in England, Harvard and Yale and William and Mary here in the new United States, these were places that for the most part taught Latin and Greek and biblical history and Roman history. These were places created primarily to educate ministers and school teachers and other professors. Washington College was going to be different. Washington College, as William Smith had said in that letter to George Washington, was going to be about creating citizens, creating patriots, creating worthy Americans for this new generation. And so along with Latin and Greek and religion, the traditional staples of a university education, Smith included other surprising things that indeed many of which we are still studying at Washington College today. Modern languages, French, Spanish, and Italian. Washington College was among the very first institutions in the United States to teach any of these modern languages. I believe it was teaching Italian before they were teaching Italian at Harvard and Yale. In fact, the son of Mozart's librettist came here to Washington College specifically to teach Italian in those early days. Science was a very important part of the curriculum in those days. Indeed, many branches of science, including astronomy, geology, chemistry, I'm proud to say, Dr. Cregan, and paleontology, at a time when paleontology sort of barely even existed, but actually on the original curriculum for Washington College, William Smith listed fossils as one of the things that should be studied. Political science was also studied, political science and law, fine art, and indeed a member of the Peale family, Elizabeth Peale, a relative of the great painter Charles Wilson Peale, was hired to teach drawing and painting to Washington College students in the 1780s, and she's also thought to have been the first female college professor at any American college and university. And modern history was taught, the history of the modern European nations, the history of the Americas, even American history. Kind of amazing at a moment in time when there basically was almost no American history. I mean, you can imagine the professor standing up in front of the class and saying, so, gentlemen, what happened yesterday? And also, of course, there were other great life skills that continue as well to be taught at Washington College, accomplishments without which no young man or woman could make his or her way in the professional, intellectual, and business world, namely dancing and sword fighting. Let's bring back sword fighting at Washington College, shall we? Now, George Washington did have, I must admit, one or two more fleeting contacts with the college. William Smith never gave up on his dream of making George Washington attend a meeting of the Washington College board, of making him an active member of the board. And he kept writing to invite Washington to attend a board meeting. Washington always had other things to do. But finally, George Washington took a trip to Philadelphia in 1784, happened to pass through Chestertown on his way up to Philly, and so William Smith got the idea. He got the idea that on the way back, he would ambush George Washington. So when George Washington was on his way back from Philly, this is only a slight exaggeration, William Smith more or less jumped out from behind a tree, grabbed George Washington and said, "General, it's so good to have you here in Chestertown. We just happen to have a Board of Visitors and Governors meeting going on right at this moment. If you'll come right this way, sir." Pulled General Washington off to the board meeting. Washington dutifully signed his name to the ledger book of the Board of Visitors and Governors, and so for that one moment at least, he was a trustee of our college. He came here to campus, attended a play that our students put on. It's a wonderful thought of Washington out here on the campus green watching the students put on a play. I believe that was before they built the theater here. So it probably was out on the campus green. And of course, the account goes that Washington was so moved by this play that they put on that everyone looked over and there were tears streaming down the great man's face. Now, can you guess who wrote this account? William Smith. Okay, anyway, tears may or may not have been shed in Chestertown. But in any case, Washington, we know, did come here. Washington, moreover, became a Washington College alumnus several years later, a fact of which I believe we can justly be proud. And here again in his papers in the Library of Congress is Washington's original Washington College diploma from 1789. Shortly after he became president, William Smith sent a delegation up to New York, which was then, of course, the American capital, and they presented an honorary degree to George Washington. It has a very flowery Latin address on it, hailing Washington in all kinds of extravagant terms. I think my favorite Latin term, we had this translated a few years ago, my favorite Latin term is Avenger of Liberty. Where does this leave George Washington on our campus? Was he indeed the noble founder whose bust you see in marble enshrined here? Was he the mascot that I suggested William Smith wanted to introduce? Or was he, ladies and gentlemen, I would leave you with this thought now, was George Washington just a bro? What do I mean by a bro? Well, George Washington in some ways lives on in each and every one of our students walking around this campus today. That, I think, is how William Smith would have wanted it. He lives on through the ideals that are still promulgated here, through the curriculum that still educates our students, not simply in Latin and Greek classics as they are, at Franklin, Marshall, and Gettysburg and most of our rival schools, but also in political science and art and all kinds of other exciting fields. So I think that George Washington lives on in every bro, in every nerd, in every geek, in every jock, in every artiste, in every scientist, in every rock star, in every sorority sister, and every sword fighter here at Washington College. There he is. And indeed, I think that those words of William Smith writing to George Washington, talking about instructing and animating the youth of many future generations to admire and imitate these public virtues and patriot labors which have created a private monument to you in the heart of every good citizen. Ladies and gentlemen, I hold that these words are no less true today than they were 230 years ago, and especially true as we celebrate Washington's birthday. Thank you very much.